So good evening, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you to the first of a series of events connected with the Outsider Writing Project, which I'm involved in organising along with my colleague Matt Fitch from the University of Essex in England. My name is John Wilkinson. I'm Director of Creative Writing and a Professor in the Department of English. And this evening I'm going to be welcoming Eleni Stecopoulos and Verity Spot, and they will be reading in that order. First of all, though, I have a number of thanks to make, as is customary. I'd like to acknowledge that this event is funded by the Poem Present programme in the Creative Writing programme and by the Gray Centre for Arts and Inquiry. And I particularly like to thank from the Gray Centre their previous director, Jackie Stewart, and their present director, Seth Brodsky, and also Zach Cahill, their curator, all of whom have helped to bring this project to fruition. And from Creative Writing, I'm deeply indebted, as always, to our wonderful events organizer, Starsha Gill, and to our program manager, Jessie Haley. And I'd also like to thank my one-time student, Nathan Schmidt, who has done much to help in organizing this program, unpaid, simply out of the love of it. So thank you to Nathan. Okay, so I'm going to just say a few words in the characteristic Chicago way about each of the poets before each of them reads. So I'll start with Eleni. Eleni Stecopoulos is an opaque poet, and opacity can be akin to resistance. It can be conducive to resistance. It can sound like resistance. It can sound resistance. Who doesn't despair at what mouths say in the present time? Even if accompanying people acting to good effect and feeling power in the collective, words continue to issue from mouths as sets of preformed components representing rage and indignation, but often inadequate to conduct rage and indignation. Eleni Stecopoulos' work as both poet and thinker in poetics is committed to opacity as a medium that can give offence. One type could be called the opacity of the outlandish, extracting from the limitless archives of the occult and pseudoscience, schizophrenic language, alternative medicine, and conspiracy theories, the kernel of rage and indignation, and crucially, resistance, that no longer exhausts its expression in the hourly emails that come into my box and no doubt yours, proclaiming that this time a line has been crossed, this is the moment, etc. Eleni's writing often offends my more rigidly rational self, but as she declares, that the god descends on creaking pulleys in no way undermines the apparition. In reality, more often than not, it really can spoil the apparition, and we should want that. But Eleni is right about this truth in the work specifically of poetry, the creaking pulleys of Blake, Yeats, H.D. and Robert Duncan, for instance, and now we must say of Eleni Stecopoulos as well. It is vital to be offended, a word whose first meaning was to strike your foot against something and to stumble. Suddenly, resistance becomes physically felt. You're aware of your body. Which is another type of opacity in Eleni's poetry, described as visceral, and that word makes sense. Her book of poetics, which you will find outside, quick advertisement, is entitled Visceral Poetics. When reading her 2010 collection, Armies of Compassion, I learn the women who listen along my body carry messages. What is happening here? Perhaps the women are the tragic chorus working through her nerves. In Eleni's writing, the body is unfit, it is definitely not buff. This is not the body disciplined in the gym for more efficient productivity or to keep this pump, the heart, a little longer functional, the machine body. But it is the body that defiantly refuses to fit. It is a body of plurality. It is a body that evaginates and then spirals piercingly into the ear or shrinks to the nerves of the wrist or a single hair. Besiege them with your rays, she invokes, like the paranoid Judge Schraber, accepting the delusions of his godhead. Looking about, there are several ways in which poetry can be opaque, through complexity, enigmatically, through recondite information, riddles, and so forth. But for Eleni, the opacity is physical. What does this mean poetically? She is explicit. Lament is an opacity. I would dare assert that lament is the vocal register most thoroughly alien to contemporary America and Western Europe, although hardly absent. We hear it in news clips that associate it with the funerals of those our drones and bombs have killed. It is a sound of peasant grief, of terrorist or resistance grief. Yes, we hear lament after black boys are shot. As Eleni's writing knows, lament is the sound at the root of Western poetry, in Greek tragedy, a sound that tinkling verses or the prevalent hip, ironical, narcissistic, you get it, don't you lines would suppress or deflect. How did we arrive at this absurd squeamishness, performing strategy where one lacks the guts, as her cutting words put it? Armies of Compassion is a wonderful title, pitching for compassion as a force of united passion, and it's a terrific book. Since Armies of Compassion, Eleni has published the 2012 chapbook Daphnephoria, which I can't say anything about because it's completely unobtainable, and internet mentions of it tease my bibliophilia by telling me what a beautiful thing this invisible chapbook is. If you receive any impression from my comparison with poets such as Blake and Duncan, that Eleni is a lavish and copious writer, as of uncontrolled secretions and excretions, nothing could be further from the truth. Her words are extraordinarily weighed, and she publishes sparely. Everything matters. Now, I just want to get some idea of what Eleni has been writing during the last 6 years or more, and we surely can't wait any longer. Eleni Stecopoulos.
Thank you so much, John, for that fantastic reading. I feel like I've learned more about, how to think about some things and being offensive. Yes, it's good to hear. I'm going to begin with a poem for my father, Nick Stecopoulos, who died 2 years ago this Friday, who was somebody who enjoyed being offensive. And I think of this, the poem is as yet untitled, but it's a poem about immigrants. Children dip wire in sulfur, crosses harden. What was duty if it could be undone, a kind of barter molded on impersonation, a death listening to radio, suspends the air. He refused to work as anyone's employee, capping bottles of ketchup, sewing labels, serving documents, a finisher, a proof. Deep toxins permeate the temple, built not for worship, but inspiration. From refusal, they made a cult of the dead. You keep the debt raw. And so you mentioned Daphnephoria, yes, was a letterpress chapbook designed and printed by the poet Michael Cross. It is actually online now, scanned, and so in fact you can see it and read it online. And Daphnephoria is something that I wrote after visiting the island of Evia, or Euboea in Greece, where a grandfather had emigrated from in the early 20th century. And he was from a town that was renowned for thermal springs. These springs have been in operation, have been used by people for thousands of years. The mythology is that the town was founded by Apollo, and Apollo brought laurel to the island. And when I visited there some years ago, older relatives wanted to pull me aside and tell me stories about the war, about the Second World War and the Civil War, as if the stories were in the soil. And one of these relatives had a sister during the war who had hid and protected a British airman during the war and hid him in a hollow tree. And then she died very shortly after. And the man, this relative that I met, showed me proudly the certificate from the British thanking the family for their service. And so, along with many stories, Daphnephoria was the result. Who could hide in a tree and not abdicate great powers, a nation completely formed of interference? When the dogs bark, run. How many troubles do you have? How many pathlets, walls on slide and stray? What dimension is a doorway? Should it fit the light or sever the torso, expose the neck of an intruder before he even gets a look around? To be a girl who asks questions, trying to find holes in the material. To be a girl who asks in remedy, black walnut, white cedar, to fumigate the brain of trust. I'll get away, you'll get sick. Intoxicated by her name, running into streams and rivers, matrilineal, I'll become metal, wood. He stands at the spring waiting. He is polluted and cannot enter the water. But his mother gives him a code so he can enter. She sings an incantation so he can cross the water and cleanse his name. All night of the memorial, all day this fascination with analysis, unwinding and winding the snakes around, an active antithetic structure. No man is an oikos, but a mother husbands the economy. Three-legged dog physician leading the name porous as rock, plastic as Greek, turning every word compounded from two. Where there is no tower to shoot from, the whole family claims responsibility. No individual can be charged. Let's call it a rift. Earth also is a private language. The fault necessary to admit God, groundwater hot enough to undo the source, the rift when one gets or is sent away. No one young can see how opacity lends protection, not risk. A tree organizes survival around open space, hands holding the void, Daphnephoria, cleansed by laurel, the rape flowering, become fragrant, the xylem rotten, inside, outside, intact. No one young can see opacity's protection, but no one can see like the young in the dark. Really another mix, but actually another immigration poem when I think about it. I'll read some poems from Armies of Compassion, my collection of poems. This is called Autoimmunity. The epigraph is from Artaud, the theater and its double. The Grand Saint-Antoine did not bring the plague to Marseille. It was already there. This is something that I wrote during the Bush years. There are various allusions. Armies of Compassion, which John mentioned, was a stock metaphor of Bush and so-called compassionate conservatism. Yeah, and I refer to the Greek director Theo Angelopoulos and his great film, The Traveling Players. Autoimmunity. People pray for me, I just feel it. A quiet river that cuts through stone. A Pell Grant for every unborn on death row. Domicile for stay-at-home violence, 'cause buggery eliminates surplus value. I want to do well while doing good. I don't believe in amnesty. In a hopeful society, someone owns someone. I receive commerce in the storms. A director shoots a political film under the junta. He disguises it as a retelling of the Orestia, keeps even the actors in the dark. He moves them from village to village as traveling players who can never complete a performance of the pastoral where shepherd abandons courtship of shepherdess. Each staging is fatally interrupted by air raids, arrests, the shooting of collaborators on stage. The show turns into slapstick. Speech is expelled from the theater by theatricality. From 2000 to 2002, I left the country to detoxify my body, crossing the border from New York State into Ontario for weekly naturopathic treatments. Sometimes my trips coincided with American holidays like the 4th of July, or days of national importance like the presidential election and Timothy McVeigh's execution. Then all the days became theatrical. Across from what was now the homeland, I played myself as a traveling show. I left the state on national holidays, high orange alert, the mask of our tragedy. In Ontario, my blood is drained, disinfected, and replaced. I am ozonated like hazardous air, like bombs over operettas, me as lover, daughter, student, American, hardening into Reichian teeth. McVeigh's injection is on the radio. Mennonite horses shadow 5 Points Correctional Facility. At Smith's Farm, they want my name in the temple. Homeostatic microchip, industrial venom, fertilize the mountain meadows, plant your sword in the earth, democracy atones for you. I left the state on high holy days, burned over days, when the masks were capital. I wanted a fourth wall, screening puppets. I gave up my fluids in a pre-war by the zoo. There has never been theater in America. McVeigh did not bring the plague to America. There was no second man. Stratified by corn syrup, pacified by fluoride. I'm wasting time, I'm dissimulating. Swung around, fiber optic cable, lay my body in the hole as surrogate for product ownership, satiety, the fertile reserve. I'm dissimulating, I'm faking dead, booby-trapped with humanism. There has never been theater in America. All my heroes turn to gibberish as a solution, petrifying the lure of the world. What is your name? Guest worker, greenback, dubbed at the neck, swung around, information. They want my body in the holler, ivy tiger on Bechtel ass, onward, romance cannibals. You dream the occupation as if snakes were charmed to dance. What was Greek and what was tragic? What was blood feud and the liability of the verb? My body is dead. I am the name it had. Soft tissue set-asides, backdoor reparations, tricked into immunity, the freedom to refuse, to go to Canada on election day, to cleanse our blood in the mobile contamination of debt, good people of no faith at all. Like Rousseau, my colonic is my confession, this little pile by my door, autobiography. To cut off the poor is to cut off the king's love. To cut off the poor is to cut off the body. The virtuality of the criminal poor slices naturally into citation. All faith composted with abortive hearts. History ends for the true believer, Minutemen and progressives. I was wielding a sword in the time it took to become Roman. I was inexhaustible deduction, soluble fish, Mercury ocean. What affluence for my scheme. Blanched capital, embodiment, continuous war made possible by opportunistic infection. The gulf that opens when skin no longer appears color but is felt membrane, when I cannot distinguish my own cells from those about to be woken, the way vaccination pledges our autism, the offense of poverty, Judas kissed by armies of compassion, spreading liberty on the stain. Once we were a land of orphans, the theme, desire under the elms, the field, unburied child. A psychic exercised the sugar for me. I thought she could see all time frames at once. Because they have no privacy, immigrants blow the horn. The mask's capital, the syndrome national, terracing erosion, we wrote out little plots. Enduring freedom futures last a long time. Roman society staved off age with shit facials. Your ride's here, Mr. President. Stand before your fleur-de-lis. Perfume's base was always gasoline, white phosphorus, whiskey hygiene. Compensation, a dissembly line where psyche's worth less than bilateral upper extremities. Work hardening teaches pain management, how to progress from chronicity to distraction, the mask's capital, the syndrome national, the war on the poor downgraded to a tropical depression in the fourth world, not the third, a cemetery between living and dead. Modernity, or what to do with the bodies, interdisciplinarity, or pain is unaffiliated, let the department know. I was the carrier, I was the narrator, I spread liberty on foreign shores. Globalization is homesickness, the syndrome of feeling everywhere at home. Philosophy will never tell the story of its love. Our lungs a white field where anyone may stand in the taphos, evangelical Masonic plot, burned over autistic rendition, call out the immolators, because you manage your pain, I feel for you, as a chorus feels for the dead, to power another system. There has never been theater in America, impersonating the void. We no longer play in the dark. We drain the ocean, thematizing the real as scab cargo no one will unload. There has never been theater, only suppliant women, buried child, evacuating with bodies the plausible deniability of law. The world lies in parallel asylums. One prays with flesh, the other imagination. One confesses, the other writes it down. One mutilates, calls it target language. One refrains from identity in recapitulating motif. Armies keep me safe in sensitivity, like a doll made of salt in a chloramine ocean, promiscuous but sectarian. One stays identity, refraining motive. Age 5, concept of grief, role of daughter. Age 16, concept of gall, role of woman. Age 17, concept of dread, role of lover. Age 18, concept of depression, role of woman. To thematize, to seek justice, to minister relief. Stay silent, but think to yourself, we are immune to invasion. Stay silent, but think to yourself, help is on the way. When time is suspended, we can win Christian battles. When romance is insatiable, elections may be held. The shadow play goes on continuously. Damage calls for translation. Bodies our demotic horizon. Between aletheia and nostos, cultivate some apathy for the taste of home. I was the carrier, I was the narrator. I stopped dreaming and fell out of time, healed by story or husbandry of the causes that possess me. I counter earth for your mortality, my lungs for your grief, my bladder, fear, heart, martial law. And I haven't been able to write a poem for this era. I'm done with Bush's press secretary said once, the president doesn't speak in metaphors, and so that time invited these kinds of work, but not now. I'll read from a section of Visceral Poetics, really the last essay in the book called Geopathy. Take all the words that end in ology and revise them with apathy. Then nothing could be pathological anymore. We might speak again of aesthetics rather than disciplines. Those in developing countries are said to somaticize their depression, as if soma was some primitive digression from psyche, the civilized location of suffering. In California workers' compensation, psyche is a compensable body part. Perhaps Moby Dick was nothing more than the distended body America tried to expel, a bloated head overseeing America's attempt to hunt down time and capture the barbarian body in pain, who gestures in Anglo-American imagination so that we may write, a scapegoat bearing glyphs of parasitism on sedentary, toxic bodies. Certain peoples are no more head than certain others are body, much as it may be appealing or strategically essentialist to believe that. It is as much an epistemological legacy of colonialism to divide the world into oppressive heads and suffering bodies. Perhaps Moby Dick was the big pasty body white America tried to cannibalize in the desire to purge and consume more. And then there is that cannibal at the heart of the essay, that Antipodes who swallows the difference. I'll read from a long poem called Cellular Memory Theater, which is fairly new. It's because I can't distinguish between place and condition that theory becomes necessary. It's because I'm formed by misrecognition that I imagine other forms. A cellular memory theater to animate the images stored in the body, the way trauma passes through descent and transplant, the way it passes on a method, how to carry the narrative of the narrative that can't take place. In the Renaissance, the art of memory became dynamic. The storehouse turned into a theater, a wheel. The icons began to move. I want a cellular theater that animates memories of another's experience, memory as transfer without words or cognition, to expose the public secret. Everything is psychosomatic, somatopsychic, agency of no subject and without object. Cellular memory is spurious and pseudoscientific, the illegitimate knowledge of women, the indigenous, the starved, the removed, knowledge that is anecdotal, the art of feeling as articulate place and displacement. I want to recollect this illegitimate, to return rhetoric to magic, to the flow of which words are only one elixir, just as Camillo's and Bruno's instruments of cosmology, so every person might be a portal to memory without limit, an infinite universe. In Cells of Release, the artist Fiona Templeton wrote, quote, "Without erasure or return, on a continuous scroll woven through the cell block of a former penitentiary. Cell traffickers are women who leave cells in their offspring, who live with cells generated by their own bodies that are genetically foreign, a condition known as microchimerism, implicated in autoimmunity. Can memory circulate between bodies like blood outside veins? Like the chimera women who comb the battlefields after civil war, who walk the most arid place on earth searching for bodies in the sand. What lies between public and private can only be touched by women. What participates in no space can only be trafficked, touched repeatedly, removed for commerce, spread around. What chimera exists as multiple places and times? What kind of body carries ambivalence below will? The old songs speak of immigration as both a foreign place and a condition of exile, a kind of living death. How to hold, never forget against it was not a story to pass on. Toni Morrison, beloved. Can a poem be a transducer, drain the power from law? You asked me what it would take to turn the detention centers into wellness centers. Yet only yesterday, hospitality was deployed to sanitize deportation and incarceration. Guest workers, Operation Xenios Zeus, old military sites repurposed as concentration camps. Bodies are temporary vessels of energy. Future bodies reorganize this energy. Fugitive bodies reorganize memory, the way poems undo the constant sorrow of rhetoric, the way poems are a plague on rhetoric, in the holding spaces, in the cells of staggering boats, in the ports and aporias through which one's body is occupied. And to end, I'll go back to a poem in Armies of Compassion. So one of the epigraphs to the book is from Robert Duncan, Bending the Bow. In the confrontation had we danced, taking the advance of the soldiers by the number and ranks into the choreography of the day, the event the poem seeks might have emerged. The poem is called Phalanx, and its epigraph is from Thucydides. What every army does is this: when engaging, they are extended on their right wing, each overlapping the enemy's left wing with its own right, because of the way each man in his fear presses his unprotected side as close as possible to the shield of the man posted to his right, supposing that the close contact means the best protection, and this problem is initiated by the far man on the right wing, eager to keep his vulnerability away from the enemy at all times. And the others follow out of the same fear. One of the lines in the poem, these bones that mothers bore, is from a relative of a victim of 9/11 in New York City, from the newspaper. Phalanx. Robert Duncan thought war makes bad use of its soldiers, the synchrony and solidarity of their mass. War destroys the dance in itself. If only compassion could have unleashed these years, thirsty dog dragons, these years when there was no mathematics, only infinity. How robust the economy was, running on prairie time, the language made passable by gross figures. Inside the city, business goes on as usual. How to get the bodies back, how to swerve as one body at war becomes a shield of cause. We wanted fluency, not unity, left behind together, consigned to recession, resigned to consensus, the gore of our values glittering up the new trust. The plan was to compress the language till it formed a voice, then spend whole millenarian movements decoding its signature. The plan was to fly colors from adopted graves, henceforth be masterless. Whose tragic flaw is immunity, mine or yours? These bones that mothers bore can't grow as a grave grows, earth from a body. Our bodies deranged us from the goal. We pinned them with flags, talismans to ward off the perpetrator. A host country with grace to forget our goals deranged us from our bodies. We transfigured them as victims in the intricate violence of going home, in the awkwardness of community, going to join the fallen. Say names cause barbarity, and when I pronounce your sentence, there is time for just one of us to speak. Philosophy never confesses its delicate condition, or else it draw us outside the city and keep us busy in imitation of a polis. Philosophy never confesses its diagnostic essay, all points tender to the point of weakness, and laments nothing but ferocity, unclassed as song. And actually, I will end with, I was asked to write a poem for the current era. As I said, I couldn't muster anything like autoimmunity. And I came up with this grim, unfinished little poem, augury. I'll end with this. I miss Nancy Reagan's astrologer. I confess, I miss the days when empire was more opulent with its mystification. Roman power acted on the augury of flight patterns. As a child, I was taught not to fear the dark, but what people did in the light. Rhetoric cures nothing. Time to seek bare life. Thank you.